Okay, so good afternoon and welcome everybody. Welcome to the second event as part of National Academic Integrity Week, brought to you by the National Academic Integrity Network, or NAIN. My name is Aisling Reist, and as well as being the Head of Quality Enhancement at the RCSI University of Medicine and Health Sciences, I sit on the NAIN Steering Committee, and a role I greatly enjoy, and it's lovely to see some of our NAIN colleagues joining us along today. I'm delighted to host this afternoon's webinar. This week, we're focusing on the learner perspective on academic integrity. And at NAIN, we have regularly acknowledged that this perspective is essential to our work and informs so much of what we do. Our speaker today is really well placed to share this perspective as a learner who's undertaken research in this area. Stephanas is a student in his fourth year studying chemistry at Imperial College London. As part of the Academic Integrity in STEM I Explore module, he and his group conducted research into the readiness of UK universities towards artificial intelligence-related academic misconduct. This won the Group Research Prize at the recent Imperial College London Academic Integrity in STEM Student Research Conference, and was also presented at the 9th European Conference on Ethics and Integrity in Academia. Very shortly, I'm going to pass over to Stephanas for his presentation, after which we'll chat about some of the questions arising today. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please do pop it in the chat box as we go along, and I'll summarise this for Stephanas later in the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Stephanas and pass over to him to start his presentation. Welcome, Stephanas.
Thank you very much, Aisling. I'm just going to share my slides of the presentation now. There we go. All right, a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm so glad to have been invited here to speak to you on this very interesting topic on the policy responses of UK universities to artificial intelligence-related academic misconduct in undergraduate studies. This is a student-led project which was conducted earlier this year in February, and it was done with the help of my other two colleagues who worked with me on this project. So to begin, many may be aware that ChatGPT has been synonymous with the rise in AI tools as seen in both mass media, but also within academic communities as well. And what's most impressive about this software is not just the general capabilities of this as a chatbot, but the fact that actually after 2 months of its introduction, it actually garnered over 100 million users worldwide. And it is this level of present popularity that has caused the topic of AI tools, which would have been considered relatively obscure a few years ago, to become so popular and so widely known today. And as a result of this boom in awareness of the use of artificial intelligence tools, news outlets like The Guardian, or social media platforms like LinkedIn, and newsletters like Superhuman have been integral in helping the masses to grasp and keep up with the recent developments of the rapidly emerging field. Because as the headline of this article puts it, the emergence of AI is actually exciting, but it's also potentially scary too. And on this slide, this Google Trends data that's presented here only serves to drive the point further home. So over 12 months, starting from the 10th of July 2022, this weekly interest rating of specific topics and keywords shown here that actually at the point of inception of ChatGPT on 30th November 2022, there was actually a sharp rise in interest in both the software itself and artificial intelligence as a topic and a keyword in search queries. And this is evident with the prominent maxima occurring in around early February this year and around late March, and also actually in April as well of this year. Now, critically, it's important to note that AI had actually already been a topic of interest even before AI tools became incredibly popular, as seen from this historical data. And this actually shows a consistent level of awareness of its capabilities and potential. However, this spike in interest can be directly correlated to the publicly accessible inception of AI tools like ChatGPT, and though a slight downtrend can be seen in interest across all areas, it still remains relatively high today. Now, unsurprisingly, ChatGPT has been the tool that has garnered the most publicity by the media. But as we know, there are in fact more types of AI tools available, and there are numerous online databases which actually let you know of this. One such database, which I've listed here, which I particularly like, is called There's an AI for That. And actually, as of yesterday, the 16th of October, pardon me, it's the 15th of October, Sunday, it actually reports that there are a total currently of 8,757 AI tools that are useful for 2,306 different tasks. And this actually is in fact approximately 8 times the amount of tools and tasks that were recorded on the systems database about 8 months or so ago when I initially started this project. And interestingly, since I last checked this database, there have also added a statistic which details the total number of jobs that these tools are applicable for, which currently comes up to 4,847. And now, though it's difficult to put a concrete number on just how many tools there are because of this ever rapidly expanding expanse here, I've listed some of the common AI tools over here, covering a wide variety such as AI writing and code writing tools like ChatSonic and Copilot, to translation and even research services like Bloom and Elicit. And in fact, since the last time I gave this presentation earlier in July, it seems that this plethora of AI tools have almost masked the presence of ChatGPT, which in fact now has become sort of like a common household name. And of course, from the types of tools that I've cited on the previous slide, it becomes apparent that the education sector would likely be the greatest affected by the introduction of these said tools. And that is most certainly the case, especially with respect to assessments within higher education institutions like universities. AI tools have been a great concern because of their potential to promote academic misconduct offences, such as plagiarism and contract cheating, in an age where a good portion of students' learning and assessments are conducted online and asynchronously. And it's not just specific to a single field. You see, across the board, from humanities and social-based subjects like economics and law to STEM-based subjects, the use of AI tools has been found to be efficacious in not only passing exams, but also in providing help in essays too, and even more so now that the variety of tools has become incomprehensibly large. And this, therefore, has spurred conversations concerning how assessments can be better planned to account for this and how to deal with AI tools in light of academic misconduct. Now, a 2021 review by Holden and colleagues concerning academic integrity in online assessments mentions the use of this comprehensive framework called the fraud triangle. And this describes the 3 elements that are required for cheating, namely opportunity, incentive, and attitude or rationalization. So in the context of the use of AI tools, though we have recently passed the mid-year mark where most universities will have reviewed their academic integrity policies, it may be possible that universities could have difficulties ideating long-term holistic solutions for the proper regulation or acceptable use of AI tools, and this creates opportunity for academic misconduct. Additionally, because of the ease of use, access, and variety of these tools, incentive is created from their usage because of how powerful and wide range they can be. And finally, finally, the attitude of students towards AI tools is strongly influenced by the university and individual department's response to its inception. Statements and guidelines and policies which provide vague definitions and a lack of hardline definitions can reflect a lack of urgency by universities towards the management of AI tools. And this could potentially create loopholes for its misuse and potentially promote as well a cavalier attitude within student communities towards the use of these tools. Therefore, the response by universities is a crucial and pressing issue for universities because of the potential created for academic misconduct, as per the three aforementioned elements of cheating, because of the ability it gives to compromise the originality of work. It can affect the way students learn, and it can threaten the quality of assessments in testing students' core understanding of content. And so this gap in holistic awareness of the readiness of UK universities therefore became an interesting and important area that my group chose to research earlier this year. And so firstly, we wanted to determine the readiness of UK universities to manage academic misconduct relating to AI tools. And we also wanted to understand how universities defined such related academic misconduct offences, be it in their policy documents online or their student guidance documents. And lastly, we also aimed to identify if there were any gaps, be it concerning the definition of specific terms or the holistic nature of these definitions themselves. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this study was conducted earlier this year in February. So I would like to stress that because of this, the results obtained may definitely have evolved since mid-year after policy reviews for the 2023-24 academic year. So in order to obtain a representative sample, the top 50 universities were chosen for this study from the 2023 Complete University Guide League table. And we collected policy documents and student advice guides from their websites over the period of 27th of February to the 5th of March this year, using keyword-based refined searches within Google as the starting point to identify relevant sources of data for each university. And we used keywords like academic integrity or misconduct in the initial round of searches, followed by a refined search using keywords including code of conduct, policy or policies, and regulations. And to ensure that our data collection was thorough as possible, we finally searched again for specific types of academic misconduct, which include plagiarism and contract cheating. And from these shortlisted websites, on top of collating the policies and guidance documents as published, any related hyperlinks found on the page were opened and analyzed too, and this therefore allowed us to collect around 90 such documents to be used for further analysis. And then we analyzed the documents in the following ways. Firstly, by filtering out documents containing specific keywords such as artificial intelligence, chatbot, and third party, and identified where these key terms were included in the sections of these documents. And in this way, we would be able to shortlist and quantify the number of universities that explicitly consider AI tools with respect to academic misconduct as an indicator of their present readiness to manage such offences. We then took a more qualitative approach to analyzing the data through identifying various descriptions of different types of misconducts by noting whether AI tools were referred to explicitly or implicitly in documentation, and considering whether the use of third-party descriptors like human-based or someone or another or others or more neutral non-human related terms were used. And this would turn out to be extremely important because most university policies actually use this phrase third party and other related terminologies as a generalized descriptor to encompass a wide variety of sources of academic misconduct. But finally, we also wanted to quantitatively assess the readiness of universities towards AI-based academic misconduct by developing a novel rating system called the AI Misconduct Readiness Rating or AIMR rating system. And so this slide summarizes the rating system itself, comprising of 4 tiers. Tier 1 represents universities that are most ready to manage potential cases of academic misconduct posed by AI and reflects a strong university statement on its management. This is observed when universities explicitly reference the use of AI tools as specific breaches of academic integrity policy. And it may also publish information on their websites or student guidance pages. And this is in comparison to the higher numerical value tier ratings, which represent universities that have a bit more vague definitions or limited or no student guidance, and also a focus on human-based traditional offenses like plagiarism or paying someone to commission a piece of coursework. Now, moving on to the results. To begin, it was noted that most of the university policies collected earlier this year were last modified in August or September of 2022, before the start of the present academic year, though there are still some institutes that dated policies from 2021. So it's not unexpected that most universities that had mentioned AI in their policies had relatively recent modifications, potentially around the end of 2022 or going into the start of 2023. Now, analyzing this AIMA data, we calculated an average score of 2.83 with a standard deviation of 0.91. And what this shows is that universities actually may not be sufficiently ready to manage academic misconduct relating to AI tools, since the average is quite close to 3, and most of the data lies in between 1.9 to about 3.7, which actually suggests a generally vague policy definition and generalized keywords that may be difficult to interpret as including or not including the use of AI tools as an academic misconduct offense. Now, this average score of the 50 universities is slightly below 3, mainly because of the effect of the ones and twos representing around 24% of the data compared to the fours, which actually represent 20% of the data. However, there are some outliers in the data. For instance, Aberdeen University, which is ranked 37 at the time, did not mention artificial intelligence in its policies. However, it did mention the use of AI in teaching and in learning sections on StaffNet, which is the college website for use for staffs instead of undergraduates. And therefore, this makes it quite difficult to assign a correct score for such outliers. And I'm aware that the area of threats to AI is an emerging area at the moment, and it's continuously evolving. So universities may actually still be at the stage where they are evaluating the usage of these artificial intelligence tools. And so there is a strong possibility that a repetition of this study later in this calendar year, or maybe in the next academic year, will actually reflect fewer such outliers where more guidance is progressively issued. And as you can see here, I've plotted as well the rating distribution in chronological order of the university rank. And again, it shows that most universities ranked a 3, as seen from the orange dots over here. But I want to say as well, it's actually worth noting that the AIMA distribution has a slight fluctuation among the top 10 universities, with most universities showing a lacking readiness to combat AI-based academic misconduct, while the middle-ranked universities shown by the red square have a more consistent rating, while still showing a relatively low readiness. But what I found most interesting from this data was that on the far end, around rank 40 to 50, the data is more spread to the extremes of 1 and 4. And this indicates the potential for a greater preparedness of the lower ranked universities to AI-based academic misconduct. But this could have also contributed to the high standard deviation of the data set, considering the small sample size that we have. Now, moving on to the keyword hits from the documents collected. These pie charts represent consistent results to what I showed on the previous slide with the AIMA rating distributions. Now you can see here that actually 20% of universities explicitly mentioned artificial intelligence in their policies or student guidance websites, while 14% of institutes explicitly mention the use of chatbots as an AI tool. And the percentage of institutions that reflect these keywords, it corroborates well with the proportion of Tier 1 and Tier 2 rated universities. Now, see here again, as a reminder earlier on, that 58% of universities mention third party in their document, which is the phrase that I used earlier on to take note of. And this actually reflects a score no smaller than the Tier 3 rating that I showed on the previous slide. And though we expected probably a higher percentage of the documentation reflecting the consideration of third-party usage for academic misconduct. The reason for this lower than expected proportion is because of the various terminologies that were used in these documents. So for example, phrases like commercial services, commissioned work, professional services were used as analogues of this keyword third party, which makes the consideration of this phrase more like 80% rather than 58%. Now, to understand more about what the phrase third party refers to, I've extracted an example from the edition of the Academic Misconduct Handbook of Durham University from the last academic year. And in this document, it mentions third-party services as including web-based companies, websites, individuals, which is quite, if I must say, a rather well-defined and comprehensive description itself. And in fact, in general, a good number of universities categorize this type of academic misconduct using similar definitions, classifying the offense of contract cheating through the specific mention of third-party software or ghostwriting. And offense definitions actually do vary across universities, though with other interesting classifications like personation, impersonation, and false authorship in some universities. Now, however, there are gaps in policies and student guidance. In relation to offense classifications, some universities classify AI-related academic misconduct offenses using overlapping classifications without a clear and sufficient definition of some of the key terms like third party or commercial service or essay site. And this lack of a clear definition may seem to be an effective sort of blanket statement for policymakers to capture a potential breach in the interim of policy development. But actually, this can cause great confusion among students, as they may not be sure if AI tools are included within the terms of the documents and guidance. And we also found that AI usage is considered as academic misconduct among research universities that updated their policies concerning their usage. But the main exception is UCL, which actually allows the cautious use and proper acknowledgement of artificial intelligence tools at the time. But generally speaking, policies that have been updated with regard to the use of AI tools and its relation to academic misconduct reflects its use as a form of misconduct itself. Now, in light of these findings, it is also important to underscore the limitations that we found in our research. Concerning academic misconduct, policy documents and student guidance alone may not be representative of the university's position on the use of AI tools. For example, university committees may be presently in the planning phase of providing more up-to-date regulations as a reflection of the emergence of the topic. And again, as this research was conducted in February of this year, there may be changes, major or minor, that have been reflected in policies that may have not been reconsidered in this research. However, the latest regulations encompassing the use of these AI tools may also not be made available, updated, or accessible to the wider campus. In addition, other sources of data like policy committee meetings may not be publicly accessible, and thus this limits the analysis concerning an institution's readiness to manage and mitigate AI-related academic misconduct. And this can influence the conclusion drawn concerning the position of universities towards the use of AI tools. And so one must be cautious of making blanket statements about the university's position on its use and related offenses. Besides, universities need to ensure that AI-related policies are based on an interdisciplinary approach, and this should take into account the various regulations and unique needs and considerations across disciplines. And so this interdisciplinary approach should be reflected in the policy documents and in the guidance documents to students before they get released, and this does take time to develop. Another limit be the small sample size of UK universities taken. In spite of this interesting trend observed in the lower ranked universities, it may be difficult to say for sure that most lower ranked universities reflect this more ready policy since we only have data reflecting 10 out of the 130 total universities in the ranking list. And so to ensure that the results of the study are more representative of UK universities, the sample size should definitely be expanded from the present 38% sample size to include a larger range of universities across all ranking levels. And lastly, due to the rapidly emerging field of AI tools, it's hard for universities to review and revise their policies regarding AI tool-related academic misconduct. Institutions may not update their policies promptly, other than maybe during their annual or biannual review, and this may result in universities and department positions being disseminated to students more informally via newsletters instead of updating documents online. So, in closing, it is imperative for universities to urgently consider and regulate the usage of AI tools, since its use can compromise the integrity of academic standards. Through the potential to automatically generate decent answers and text, AI tools can encourage academic dishonesty when used unwisely, which replaces traditional services provided by third parties such as essay mills, and empowering students to the normalization of academic misconduct. However, reflection of AI usage mentioned in these academic misconduct policies or guidance as of the last academic year was generally vague without clear and explicit terms on the use of AI tools within offense definitions. Now, although lower ranked universities do generally show a greater guidance and specificity on AI tools usage in academic misconduct compared to higher tier unis, it may be unclear to students whether or not it reflects the prohibition of AI tools either. And so therefore, it is crucial that universities make clear and definite statements that are easy to understand and accessible to all students, at least within this academic year or the next, to reflect the unique times that we are in. Overall, what this project has shown is the increasing importance of prudence in regulation and the need for impetus to drive change at the national level across various institutions and governing bodies to mitigate the potential for academic misconduct and enhance the student learning experience in an age of AI. As a topic, the study of readiness of universities to manage and mitigate AI tools related to academic misconduct is a rich field which currently lacks much pre-existing literature. Further studies in this area could compare and contrast department-specific regulations across all sampled institutions and repeat the study across further academic years to gain a more comprehensive view of the evolution of AI-related policies. They could also repeat the same methodology and analyses presented in this project to see if there has been any tangible change on the policy and guidance level since early 2023. Additionally, expanding the scope of this study could be done to encompass universities across Europe, as well as a range of UK universities, to provide a broader perspective on the university stances on AI usage. And I would definitely suggest in the short term to expand the scope of this project to the whole of UK. And I'd strongly suggest Ireland too, as a close neighbour, before extending this survey across other European countries too. Surveys can also be carried out to ascertain what students and staff think about the use of AI tools, which in turn can actually help to inform more effective mitigation strategies and policies. Universities should also collaborate with third-party services like Turnitin or Moodle or UniCheck to build up an understanding as well of how AI-generated text can be better detected and how this may inform more holistic regulations and guidance planned by institutions. And lastly, as a point not reflected in the slides, it may also be important to build upon the principles reflected in the AIMER system to develop a more comprehensive framework that can be applied as a readiness metric, both on the institutional, but also on the national level. And this is an ever more important thing to do as a way to provide a further impetus towards change and a of new practices to weather the threat that AI can cause to HEIs. And so with I've come to the end of my presentation. And once again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present my work here today. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Stephanas, sorry, my brain has gone mad there. Thank you so much for that. That was a really, really interesting presentation, and I can see Sue doing a clap and others clapping as well. So greatly appreciated. I thought it was brilliant. Really interesting to get that perspective, and very interesting, I think, specifically looking at policy in the area, which I think is something that there hasn't been an awful lot of research done in, and yet I suppose higher education institutions are grappling with. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and start one of my own questions here. I suppose one of the things you've described there was in relation to governance, and I suppose the need ever increasingly for institutions to have governance that's responsive. And that can be really challenging because, as you said as well, you know, often I suppose to get policy right, you want to consult all of the different disciplines, for example, and you want student voice as part of it, and lots of other things. So how do you ensure that, I suppose, you have a governance system that's, I suppose, responsive, but also allows that inclusion piece? You know, do you have you any ideas about what the right balance is? Because I think sometimes as higher education institutions, we can be tied up in going through the process, and also trying to get it just right, rather than, you know, are there times, I suppose, particularly with things like COVID and AI, where we should be moving a little bit more quickly? Any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Definitely on a policy level, we don't want to sort of say, well, you know, I've got lots of students who are interested in academic integrity, so let's just chuck them onto the policy committee meetings like immediately. That would be a very unwise idea, because obviously for students as well, we ourselves may have a limited perspective or a limited view to only what we see. So I think definitely in a sense, in order for us to obtain holistic governance in understanding and coming up with documents to reflect the use of AI, it's definitely important for us to hold, for example, things like this, like student panels, webinars, in order to obtain student views and student perspectives on the use of artificial intelligence tools. And I think there are national student surveys that go out across the UK. I think it's every year they do that. And I think one way to get a sensing of students' perspectives would be to include a section on artificial intelligence in those surveys, in order to then be able to check data on it, but also to get a sensing across the nation as well on that. And definitely weighting as well, weighting those surveys of basically picking the meat off the bone of what students provide, but also from staff perspectives as well, of how they use AI tools, can be very important for us to consider when we think about this model of holistic governance as well. Yeah, definitely it will be good as well to get views on AI usage, like the most popular tools, because obviously now I know ChatGPT may not necessarily be the most popular tool out there. So even getting a sensing as well of how the market is evolving AI tools, where are these areas that we need to focus on, especially in terms of education, because the tools that are used in education are very different from the tools that are used, say, by a communicator or by a consultant. And even in those big numbers, like 8,757, not all of those tools could be applicable to the education sector itself. So that also needs to be considered quickly.
And possibly there are differences, I'd imagine, in the tools between different disciplines as well, as in there'll be certain tools that would be used much more by students and practitioners in some disciplines versus others. Do you see, I suppose, a role for AI within education as well, as an educational tool, as opposed to being something that is verboten, if you know what I mean, and shouldn't be used?
That's a fantastic question. I think that's like the £1,000,000 question at the moment. Do you allow students to wholesale use artificial intelligence, and is it going to be difficult to regulate? Because regulation of something that can be so easily accessible is so difficult, because it's not like everyone uses a college institution-owned laptop or device. When I go home today, I can probably go online and I can look for any AI tool that I want out there. And there are even tools, I think, because I'm subscribed to this newsletter called Superhuman, which is an amazing newsletter that keeps you up to date with AI things. I think one of the interesting things that came out was a tool that was called ScamBot or CrimeBot or something like that, which is really interesting, because it's not just tools that are for good that are being released, but tools for bad that are being released as well. And I think in terms of regulation, regulating AI tools, it can be a big brain shaker, that one. But I personally think that AI tools are very useful. They are useful, especially for those who are in research, who have to pile through hundreds of pages of review documents, hundreds of pages of research papers. It can be very useful to summarize data as well, to build up existing databases. So for example, I study chemistry and I depend on databases every single day to find compounds, to find data that I need for spectroscopic techniques, and having AI at the behest to be able to improve my work and to improve the way I do things can actually allow me to do research better and faster as well. But definitely there is that big risk as well, that big risk of equity. Because if you look at ChatGPT now, although it's come out in the news that ChatGPT has become available to the whole internet, it's only available to users who use their Plus account, which is paid, whereas the free version still has information up to September 2021. So if we want to say students use your AI tools, then there's a question of whether people who are on the upper end of the income scale could have a greater benefit and greater access to these tools than those who are on the lower income scale. So then that itself is for universities to think, well, should I get licenses for these tools? Should I make them available to everyone? Should I teach people how to use these things? We don't know at the moment. It's still an evolving area.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is the questions that are coming in are very much related to that. So one from Adrian Aronson's Storier, and I think that's where I got the name mixed up earlier on. So apologies. I was reading his comment when I started speaking to you. And one of the things he had talked about was, I suppose, the challenge of whether or not generative AI should be an academic misconduct offence. And I think that's kind of come into the discussion you had. And the comments that have come back have been related to that, have been interesting. One, another colleague, Monica Ward, has talked about unauthorized use of generative AI. And I will come back to Nicola's comment more fully in a minute. She had spoken about, I suppose, the clarity around policy. So I think this is all coming together in that it's a challenge, I suppose, for people. Do you ban AI? Versus do you say, okay, well, there's authorized use and there's unauthorized use, and then how do you make that clear in policies, particularly if it's so rapidly developing? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, yeah, it is part of that big question of should we allow use, or how do we define use? And I think for me, personally, I'm a big pedantic when it comes to definitions. So when I look at definitions, and I think, okay, so what do you mean by unauthorized? What do you mean by generative AI? Because there are so many different types of AI. Like, for example, ChatGPT itself is a large language model AI. But there are loads of other things, like, for example, if let's say we look away from the field of the science and we go into things like the arts, and we think of image generating AI or music generating AI, then that itself becomes very difficult. And I think in terms of authorized versus unauthorized usage, and whether a university should try to err on the side of caution, I think at the moment, because of how much AI has already evolved, we have gone beyond the stage where we can say students stop using AI, because out there it's available to people. So now the question is, how do we mitigate and how do we manage that, rather than should we stop people from using these things? And ultimately, there are two big ways that you can do this. My supervisor, Thomas Lancaster would say that, well, this first method of detection may not necessarily be the best thing to do, obviously, because as we know, detection tools like Turnitin may not necessarily do the job 100%, and you can't put your 100% faith and trust in these tools in order to detect AI usage, which itself could be, in my mind, considered as an unauthorized usage detection method. That's why in the long term, if we do build on detection, you have to work very closely. Universities definitely have to work very closely with these platforms like UniCheck or Moodle or Turnitin in order to improve these models for the long term, essentially. But in the shorter term, definitely in order to manage and mitigate this so-called unauthorized usage, we do have to take a view on assessment itself. How do we change assessment so that it's AI proof, but at the same time, we don't get ourselves into a rabbit hole where we set something too difficult for a first year, for example, to do something that has a creative element or a creative portion to it that doesn't necessarily have a fixed answer that I can just go and Google up online. And this also comes into the question like in-person exams or online asynchronous exams. And ultimately, it's up to the departments in a university. I can't say for certain on for a whole university what type of exams you should do, but that definitely needs to be considered on a department level as well.
Thank you. There's a lovely question here from Catherine Whitehurst in relation to, I suppose, vague language and policies. And she was wondering whether you were suggesting that universities that used vague language were less prepared for AI. And if so, do you think that actually having more open and vague terms allows for universities to be more inclusive of a variety of third-party uses, particularly considering how quickly the field is growing? And she was saying that her own experience is that there's sometimes been a push to keep things vague to allow for greater academic judgment on a case-by-case basis. I do think that is a challenge, you know, in relation to, I suppose, even for us when we've developed the lexicon at Nain, you know, I suppose the higher level you keep a definition, the more longer lasting it potentially can be. But yet, are you sacrificing clarity to students and to academic staff? So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, definitely, I am an atypical student in the sense that I read through policy documents. Students themselves will not necessarily read through a policy document. So let's think of it from a hypothetical scenario. Let's say student A uses AI tools, for example, and then that's classed as an unauthorized usage of artificial intelligence tools. And then student A then goes up to the board in the department and then is told, look, you've used AI tools wrongly, and then gets shown this policy document. And then there is then that question of comprehension, right? So then the student might be like, oh, so where does it say that I can't use that?
Yeah.
So that's a big question to have. So obviously, vague definitions are sort of beneficial in the sense that they do encompass the ever-evolving, rapidly evolving field that we're in. However, I do think that when I used vague definitions in the presentation, it was referring to the mention of AI tools rather than just third-party service themselves, because a third-party service can be anything or anyone. But in order to reflect the times that we are in, policy should explicitly mention the use of AI tools and give, for example, case studies on student guidance websites. So if the policy document itself is vague, but the student guidance websites do provide, for example, training, or they do provide resources or case studies in order to help students to understand the use of AI, then ultimately that would help to weather in the long term as well any sort of academic misconduct offences. At Derby, I got asked a question as well by the ENI president about, oh, so if my university sort of doesn't do all these things, does it mean that I have a low rating? And my answer is no, because if you provide enough information for students to understand it, then you can still have vague definitions in the policy for long-lasting effect. But you can have things that will be accessible and available to students to actually understand, okay, this is how, for example, I use chatbots, or this is how, for example, I can use translation services, or this is how, for example, I can use research summary services. So this is something that is a long-term project, I believe, for every university, every organization. It's not going to be something that, I'm not going to say I can compile a database in a week. It's something that comes with trial and error, comes with survey, comes with feedback. And so hopefully this will help to sort of keep the general sense of a vague definition when defining AI usage, but also having that level of specificity that is needed for students. Because ultimately, if a student commits an offense, they want to know what they've done wrong, where they've gone wrong, and how they can sort of learn from it and move on in a sense of mediation afterwards or disciplinary procedures afterwards.
Brilliant. So it sounds like even layers are what we need, maybe policies at a certain level, but just lots of information coming in, keeping it current, that maybe don't require us going back and going through those huge processes to get policy updated. I think a very good point from Nicola Gaffney as well. She spoke about key learning point is the need for clear policies and to ensure the students are fully cognizant of these policies as part of their integration, rather than just producing policy they've not reviewed when they breach said policy. So I think that's an excellent point. The other thing that she also spoke about is the need to ensure that learners still understand the learning and don't over rely on AI to complete their work. Do you think that's a risk for us going forward? Or I suppose that balance of making sure that students have the foundational knowledge in order to be able to use the information and critically appraise the information that's coming from AI, rather than potentially having students who, I suppose, only have the knowledge that they learn from AI and therefore don't know how to, I suppose, evaluate it sufficiently.
Yeah. It's a tricky question. It's a very tricky question, because I'm going to address the first part first about whether sort of AI usage itself should so-called be allowed in that sense. I think definitely in terms of the use of AI, it can be introduced sort of it can be introduced year on year. So for example, people who are in first year or second year, for example, they may not necessarily have as much of use of these AI tools as compared to those who are in fourth year, for example, who are preparing to go out into the working world and actually need to learn how to use these things themselves. So I think having that sort of tiered approach as well of when we introduce AI tools people and when we introduce these things does count a lot, because what we don't want to have is we don't want to have a generation of students from the onset built upon AI tools and then going into fourth year or fifth year and lacking the critical skills to then, analyze or take data, for example. So things that can seem menial tasks like summaries or writing an essay, I could just say, well, I can just chuck it into XYZ software and it will give me a summary. But that doesn't help you to evaluate the learning outcome of why you're doing the assessment itself or why you're doing this specific thing, which in fact, as with a university degree, builds up towards the final year itself. And on the question as well of, I think it was, sorry, could you repeat the question again for the second, the other part of?
Absolutely. It was about, I suppose, well, it was probably related to it, was about the over reliance on AI really and the knowledge piece, but I think you've covered it well.
Yeah, I think definitely in terms of that usage, mitigate, manage its usage according to year is my opinion, and definitely education on its usage, especially for those in final year, can be something that could be very useful. Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is Adrian's also made a point that I think would very much support your view there, which is that he's found having students mark ChatGPT generated essays is a powerful way of helping them understand the limitations of the tools.
Yeah.
I think that's an approach that a few people have taken, and I think it's very interesting.
Oh, I think I remember the first part of the question.
Okay.
Now it just suddenly
Yeah, go
popped back
for
in
it.
my mind. It was the
You've
part
got a better
about
memory than I do.
it was the part about the learning objectives and the use of AI tools and the focus that students have. So students oftentimes, as you know, depending on the university and depending on the university culture itself, can have very different focuses. For example, some students in some universities may be more relaxed, and they'll be like, oh, you know, the assessment counts, but then I'm here to learn, and that builds up to the final year. Whereas in very success-based universities, it can be, oh, I need to get this grade, I need to get this mark in order to move up. And so that itself can change the perception, right? The perception towards whether I want to do this assessment and use AI tools in order for me to get a good mark versus I want to do this assessment, use the AI tools, and that helps to enhance my learning experience. And ultimately, for every university, the goal of a university is to give students education, but also to enhance the student learning experience, right? So in enhancing the student learning experience, it is important to also mitigate a negative culture of success in the sense that it's grades, 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 marks, marks, marks. Obviously, it's important. We don't want to just let any Tom, Dick, and Harry go to the next year, right? That would not be good. It would compromise safety as well, especially in degrees like medicine or aeronautical engineering. You don't want someone to, you know, who's failed their degree, but the university passed them to then go on and design an easy jet, right? That would not be very safe. But yet we also don't want to have that culture where we put so much pressure on students that it then creates the attitude, as from the fraud triangle, the attitude of the rationalization for students to then go out and use these AI tools. So it's consideration of those things that need to be taken into account for when we think about the planning of assessments and whether the learning objectives are met within specific bounds.
Yeah, and very interestingly, Martina Crehan has made a comment which I think is very aligned to some of the things you're talking about there, which is if building into curricula or not, it's an opportunity to review assessments and indeed learning outcomes, not just terms in assessing vulnerability to AI, but also reviewing the authenticity of our assessments in general. And I think there is a challenge, as you know, I suppose, and you spoke about it with that piece of are we floating back to those in-person, you know, exam room assessments because we have, I suppose, a bit more security around them, versus, I suppose, is that impacting on authenticity and validity of assessments for the learning outcomes that we have? So what, I suppose, any thoughts on that? I suppose where that balance should be or could be.
Oh, in terms of person assessments versus remote or asynchronous assessments, it's a very tricky one. I can speak on behalf of my degree program. So in chemistry, having a good mix of in-person assessments, exams, and essays does help, because the in-person exams help to test core content or core knowledge. For example, in the working world, in the industry, you're not going to have a chemist look through their 10,000-page textbook in order to find the reaction. They should have something like that in their head, so that then when they do an experiment, it's something that they can think about at the back of their mind and then predict what's going to happen in reactions that they do in a lab. So those are important to do, essentially. Those are important sort of historical key findings or historical data sets or trends that can be assessed by an in-person assessment. And I think rightly so, would be okay, because those are sort of pinnacle and pivotal things in a field. But things that are a bit more flexible. So for example, doing an experiment in the lab itself, something can go wrong, something can go right. And these things that are variable, the variability in that is something that that departments can assess well through an essay, because it's not in chemistry, it's not, oh, you make more of this, you get a higher mark. It's more so, what is the thinking process that is done behind the experiment that you're doing, that shows that you understand what's going on and you understand why, for example, you didn't get the product that you wanted, or as much of the product as you wanted. So that's especially for the chemistry perspective. Now, I mean, we can go on for hours and hours talking about the other degree programs, but ultimately, I think it does boil down to the question of, what do you feel is core content for students that students should be able to intuitively know? In our department, we call it chemical intuition. How are we building up people's intuition into thinking about problems? Those can be assessed quite a bit in an in-person assessment, for example, done under, for example, an hour or two, a timed assessment. Whereas things that are a bit more flexible, things that relate to concepts that are applied in a workplace itself, for example, experimental procedures, or let's say if we talk about the music field, a recital, for example, those need to be assessed via an essay or a viva, for example. Essays may not necessarily be the only thing used as an assessment. I think one of the interesting things that came up a lot in the academic integrity conference that I attended in July was the need for viva assessments as well. Although time consuming, they do sort of impart the more emotional and sort of physical aspect of an assessment, because you can tell whether a student knows what they're knowing based on how they answer questions when they are looking right in front of your face, essentially.
Stephanas, I'm going to have to stop now because we're nearly out of time, but I have to say, I'm always so impressed by the work of our students when they speak to us at the National Academic Integrity Network events. But I have been utterly blown away by you today. I suppose it's frightening to think that somebody is studying chemistry and yet has such expertise in all of these areas. I've thrown tons of things at you today, and you have been absolutely well able for them, and more than able for them. And you know, to coin a chemistry phrase, I think you've been a great catalyst for all of our thinking today. And really, really, really thank you so much for coming along and sharing with us. I look forward to seeing the incredible future ahead for you, because my goodness, I think you've massively impressed all of us today. And I can see why the name crew picked you up when they were over in Derby and included you in at our event today. We hugely appreciate it. Unfortunately, I am going to have to call it to a close there. I think we could have talked for the next hour, but we will let people go. But before I do, I again, just to thank you, Stephanas, for your incredible presentation and great conversation. And also thanks to Sue Hackett and Adele Sheeran from the National Academic Integrity Network for all of the organisation that went into today's event, and to our chair, Billy Kelly, who's also online today, who is, I suppose, the guiding force behind all of the work that we do at NAIN. Thank you, Stephanas, and thank you to everybody for joining us. We greatly appreciate you coming along today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.